almost be live. Live could be happening in just a moment. I think live is happening. I think live has been happening for 7 seconds now.
Maybe.
And I'd like to welcome everyone here. Ryan, do you have a comment about the infrastructure? Are we doing okay?
We're doing fine. We're doing well. We're live on YouTube. We got one viewer. Zoom is going to be back and forth as we go through. People will see my Zoom in the background, so don't be afraid by that. Otherwise, infrastructure is up, and hostess with the mostest. Please continue.
I would like to introduce everyone for the first time or again to Rob Wipond, who joined us in December 2023 at a time where a lot of really meaningful things were going on. There's a post up on the Substack right now linking back to that for anyone who wants to go explore that later. There's a link at the bottom of the screen that is our tag page of posts that reference Rob's work. I'm really grateful, Rob, that you could join us. And I want to say a little bit before we start to provide a little bit of context for where we're at. So there are a number of people on this call with us right now that none of this would have been possible without. There is a colleague of ours, Father Jim O'Brien, who was instrumental at that time in December. Rob, I never would have succeeded at getting on that interview with you if it weren't for Father Jim and all of the work he did with our groups. I want to mention Ryan Erickson and the Purple Squirrel Cafe making this infrastructure work when I could not be doing this at all without that assistance. And there are a lot of other people that I could go on and on and on naming who have made it possible for this work to continue and who have made it possible for me to be here on a call, Rob, with you again, because your work is so important to what we do and what we help others learn about in the Intuitive Network. So we get an opportunity to introduce you to more people and for us to bring in more of these community conversations we've been having over the past almost 2 years since we talked last.
Yes, thanks for having me.
So the first thing that I want to touch on is that we introduced everyone to your work in December 2023, but all kinds of things have happened since 2023. And the first thing that some of us are very curious about is how would you introduce your work now? Do you think it's particularly different? Do you think it's exactly the same?
Yeah, there's many ways to answer that. And for people who don't know me, I'm the author of this book, Your Consent is Not Required: The Rise in Psychiatric Detentions, Forced Treatment, and Abusive Guardianships. And yeah, it was published in 2023. And so some things have happened since then, for sure. I've been learning lots, I think. And I want to thank you for inviting me. And I think we talked about last time, but I want to say again, thank you for educating me about some of these issues. Much of the book is full of people's stories who've experienced involuntary commitment in different ways, people from different walks of life. And you educated me about a vast swath of the population that I really had not known anything about. And so, yeah, I'm excited to talk with you more and with other people here who've had some of those kinds of experiences as well. So, yeah, and to answer your question, I mean, off the top, one of the main things I'm noticing is the general lack of interest in media generally, in the mainstream media, really across the board politically in this issue. Like, despite the fact that involuntary commitment is in the news almost every single day, and it's gotten more intense, not less so, since my book came out, there's a striking and very noticeable lack of interest in the actual data, the actual facts, what's really going on, the number of beds out there, the kinds of people that are being affected, despite the fact that I've gone to great lengths. And in some cases, I've had like interviews that have just been never published. Yeah, I've been invited to submit articles that were never published, things like that. Like, I know that the mainstream media is somewhat aware that there are journalists out there who are somewhat aware of this. They're not interested. they're really not, because it goes against the dominant narrative. And what I'd say is what's becoming very clear is they're not interested in involuntary commitment. They're interested in homelessness in the sense that they're looking for a way to blame homelessness on homeless people. And as a result of that, one of their targets has become, oh, all these people are crazy. They're all mentally ill, and therefore they're to blame, and we need to take control of their lives. And they're willing to hold this narrative so strongly that they're even willing to spend god-awful amounts of money to lock all these people up, because we know it's far more costly to involuntarily commit people than it is to give free housing and support for people. So it's kind of ridiculous, but yeah, it's a dominant narrative. And I can only say that we're getting greater clarity. I feel I'm getting greater clarity that just they want to believe that it's part of a political narrative that spans left to right and across the middle a lot. And they really don't want to hear things like, hey, involuntary commitment affects a lot of different people in a lot of different ways. Hey, America's involuntarily committing people at higher rates than anyone else in the world almost. And hey, there are far more beds, if you know what to count, if you know where to count, than we had back in the 1950s. We basically got smaller asylums today, very small asylums, but they're functioning in many of the similar ways that the old asylums did. People just don't want to hear that. So anyway, that's one of my biggest learnings, I'd say.
I appreciate you describing that. So it feels very precise to me. It reflects the experience of so many people who have slipped beyond the threshold of being able to participate in dialogue, in public media dialogue, in community dialogue. And of course, the Intuitive Network has coordinated to make it possible for all our community members to be in contact in whatever way is possible, for all of us to recognize one another as worthy living beings and say, we don't know the answers. We don't necessarily know what solution is needed, but we're going to bring our hearts together here, and we're going to say there's something that can happen. Let's know one another better. Mm-hmm. And then we hear so many stories of people seeking the help for whatever their situation was, a massive variety of different kinds of situations that people are in, and looking for that help in their communities or in the systems that market the helping, and saying, hey, we're being preyed upon in these environments. People are saying, hey, there's something happening here that's really bad. And then, of course, like in the news, in the mainstream, like the usual public media, you will find a lot of people saying, hey, I had a really good experience. This worked really well. I would never have gotten through that time in my life without that particular resource. And that's real. People have life-changing positive experiences in all kinds of helping systems. And if we're erasing the voices of the people who are having truly terrible, horrific experiences in those helping systems, we had better be talking about it and saying, hey, let's come together and think about this and learn from one another about it. And your data points, Rob, in that book, Your Consent is Not Required. It's really like a massive highlight of the history of the Intuitive Network, is us having that book and being able to remember the data points. I think we even talked about this in December 2023, where one of the big issues is that people who experience any kind of trauma, especially severe trauma, people experiencing neurological challenges and any other kind of physiological challenges, any kind of hardship or houselessness or like difficulty, a lot of times it's hard to remember what you need most to remember, and we need a shared memory. And that book provided key data points for our shared memory that we could keep pointing back and saying, Rob knows this is happening. He's talked to all these other people that's happening. We're not just crazy. We're not just in some sort of like self-nightmare. This is happening to so many people, and that's been hugely beneficial to us.
Yeah, thank you. And so many people, and we actually do have recently, within the past month, a new study came out looking at the numbers in the United States in particular. So we do have affirmation again that basically the numbers look high. They look very high across the board compared to most other countries that are comparable in terms of how many people are being voluntarily committed. This was an independent group from the last one that retread some of the same territory, got more data. But overall, the main message from that report was that at probably about half the states, and really more, probably the vast majority of states, are collecting somewhere between no data at all and very little data. And they're just basically, this is still a very much a hidden mass problem across the United States. There's only a few states where we can fairly confidently say we think we're grabbing maybe at least half, if not most of the numbers of how many people this is happening to. But even then, we have serious questions about the data. So it's just an appalling, it's shocking evidence in an appalling example of governments having little interest in actually just understanding how many people is this happening to, let alone are we truly helping these people or not. Like, that narrative's out there in the media. Oh, this really helps people. That's what we're trying to do when we lock them up in psychiatric hospitals and forcibly treat them. But we have no evidence that is actually what's happening. And there's little interest out there among governments or institutions or practitioners to find that evidence. The other thing I'll say, and the other thing I want to add to that, maybe I'll just bracket it for a sec, we can come back, is there has been one study, absolutely unique, and just came out last month from Pennsylvania, looking at this question is, what are the outcomes of involuntary commitment? I've never seen anything like this anywhere in the world. It's a really interesting study. It's a conversation in itself. And so, like I say, maybe we can return to it in a moment, but it's very revealing and actually very disturbing.
I want to come in here for yes,
please do, Ryan.
So there are a couple mentions about the data points that were specific in the book that really had impact on you, Megan Elizabeth. And I would like to know specifically what 2 or 3 of those data points are, and what were the biggest impacts of those that kind of said, oh my God, this guy gets it and he sees us.
You want to ask me or Rob?
I would like to ask you what struck you about Rob's work.
Well, how about I give the data points first that I think might be relevant? Would that be?
That would be a fun game.
Yeah. So the ones that I think are most relevant, and you can remind me if there's other ones for you, but is that we have this data that suggests that America is involuntarily committing people at these high rates, above 300 people per 100,000, which is, over 1.5 million people per year. And that's a really low end number. And comparatively, only Canada might compare, but every other Western European country, the UK, is much lower, like half that, quarter that, far, far lower numbers. So America incarcerates people under mental health laws at a much higher rate than anyone else. The other one, and actually I have far more data about this today than I did with the book, is the number of beds we have. So I was kind of really cobbling things together, and I've still done that, but I managed to actually find data in certain states to kind of back up my thesis, which is that if you start looking at all of the other facilities outside of general hospitals and psychiatric hospitals themselves and general hospital psychiatric wards, you get into secure residential treatment facilities, you get into adult foster homes, you get into group homes, all these other facilities. I've got much more comprehensive list of numbers that I've published in an article on the Mad in America website that's available for anyone to see. And I show there that like in certain states, definitely, particularly I got good data from New York and California, where we have this narrative that we have hardly any beds. And I showed that we have apparently more beds than we had back in the 1950s. So that's much more concrete. even than I wrote in the book. So those are the two of the pieces. And so, yeah, now
Sure.
you,
So I'll bring up my 3 points that interrelate with your points, which yes, exactly. One of them is there's this major push to answer Ryan's question. There's this major push. Ryan, come back. Can you come back? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
it will help my brain.
okay.
Since you asked, and you'll help me like keep my memory where it's supposed to be.
I just want to see your pictures so big on the screens.
One of the things is that there's this general push to say there isn't enough mental health treatment. There isn't enough mental health treatment. We have to get these people help. At the same time as we have unbelievable numbers of people trying to get help and being harmed when they try to get help, or being turned away when they try to get help. There's a major disconnect there. There are 2 other points, and right now I'm remembering one of them. One of them is, oh, no, I got them. Here we go. Memory, exercise, rehab. One of them is that we have a lot of stories, and there are more stories in your book, Rob, about professionals in mental health being required to exercise force in some way or contribute to the exercising of force in order to keep their jobs, in order to keep their licensure, and afraid of what will happen to themselves and their livelihood and their families if they don't use force or contribute to using force. And that's something that we have experienced a lot in various contexts. The other thing is that many people don't realize when they look at Rob's data, what we're talking about is a variety of forms of human trafficking. We're looking at the lucrative monetization of populations where the people have their agency taken from them and then represent money being made in a variety of different ways. And some of those ways are very like obviously human trafficking or sex trafficking when you look at the details. And then other versions of it, it takes a while for people to process and realize, wow, a lot of money is being made by hurting all of these people. So I did it. That's 3 points and I said them all.
Yeah. And I think I'll follow up on that last one. You know, it's a really good point. And really, this is one of the things that you sort of got me thinking about and enlightened around, because, you know, we were looking at those extreme cases, and then I started looking at some of the ones in the middle and realizing, yeah, like you could call this human trafficking. A great example of that was the ones that I spoke with the Department of Justice lawyer about some of the cases they were handling were essentially, he called it that. He didn't use the term human trafficking. I think he's called it body brokers, you know, that would deal in humans. And he gave examples of actually these things called partial hospitalization programs, where these body brokers would give kickbacks to people that ran some kind of assisted living facility or a nursing home. And there you would have elderly people with pretty severe dementia. They'd get kind of put in a van and taken down to the hospital for the day. The hospital would then pretend to be treating them and just be billing Medicare and Medicaid, you know, for all these treatments they weren't really giving, and kind of keep these people locked up for the day and then send them back home at night. And this was like this bizarre form of human trafficking and profiting from these bodies, essentially. And they were ultimately busted, and some people went to jail, but a lot of them didn't even go to jail. They just moved on to another facility. These practitioners that were orchestrating this whole thing very knowledgeably, like very deliberately. And yeah, so that's an example of the kind of thing we've seen. And interestingly, those kind of cases, when they're very explicit, do get a little attention in the mainstream media. We saw this year that Acadia Healthcare, the second biggest private psychiatric hospital chain in the United States, had settled with the Department of Justice. And the New York Times did a series of stories and podcasts and whatnot about like fraudulent incarcerations, people who did not meet the criteria to be incarcerated under mental health laws, but apparently were just being incarcerated in order for the company to make profit off of it. And they ultimately settled for about $20 million with the Department of Justice for having done this in a number of states in a suite of institutions.
Yeah. And one thing I want to circle back a bit to what we were talking about earlier is that, like, yes, we're noticing that there are very powerful, very visible interests in the world who don't want to talk about these things. And in the intuitive network, especially, we're experiencing an ongoing, increasing flood of people who are encountering these problems in their lives. They typically cannot communicate about it to others. And there are more and more people who are discovering this. So that's growing, but it's not really visible because the interests that are in charge of most of the visible conversations for some reason aren't, and there are lots of reasons. There are some very legitimate reasons for people not to be having that conversation, depending on their context, depending on the resources they rely on. Some people are in very scary situations where if they bring up stuff like that, they and their families could be in trouble. So, like, we know that happens for really good reasons, as well as for the unfortunate reasons that it does happen.
Yeah, well, honestly, I'd say, in my opinion, it's almost never for a good reason, or very rarely. And I'll talk a bit about that. So you're referring to mandated reporting, it's often called, and beyond. So there are some licensing bodies for nurses or doctors or so on that basically require, although there's some, real wiggle room there that we should talk about more, culturally. But essentially, the idea is that it started with, if you're trying to deal with child abuse or something. So a child may be being abused, and if you learn about that, you're required to report it to the police. And I think most of us would think that would be a proper instance of this, but it's expanded vastly beyond that now to anybody who's supposedly posing some sort of danger to themselves or others. And in the mental health arena, that becomes a very broad and flexible set of ideas, so that essentially if they think you might be endangering yourself because they think you're kind of behaving in a kind of crazy way, and you might end up, because we live in a dangerous society, you might be in a dangerous situation, then that person may feel compelled to report you to the police, and the police will come and take you to a psychiatric hospital, lock you up, and all these things kick in. And that's why it comes around to me saying, rarely do I think this is a good thing, because we know that people being locked up in psychiatric hospitals against their will, the evidence we have for that is that this is usually enormously distressing and experience that often increases dramatically suicide rates of people who've experienced hospitalization and under these kinds of terms. And just the evidence is not strong that it really helps most people at all. So yeah, that's why I have a lot of problems with it. And I've written about 988 and these helplines that will, depending on what you're saying, and they don't often disclose this clearly.
And that's what we talked about in 2023, what we touched on, and I hope people will go back and listen to this interview also, is that many people, and we'll talk about this in the second section that we're going to do after we dialogue a bit more about this. There are many people in situations where they can't find help. They're really, really suffering. People are experiencing torturous physical pain, ongoing invisible violence. And when people are in situations like that, they start to need to process about, wow, like, should I try to kill myself because this is really horrifying? And just to need to talk about it, not even being suicidal necessarily, not even wanting to do it necessarily, but needing to talk about it and reaching out to people who seem like they're just going to be caring humans who have been restricted into certain rules that they have to follow, where you just bring up how something feels, or that you have to kind of think, like, shouldn't a living being who's in this situation and can't get out, shouldn't that living being kill themselves? Like, this is horrifying that this is going on. We need to talk about it with somebody. And those people are then too frequently swept in to these automatic, you're a danger to yourself or others, when they're just having a normal, natural human process about, holy moly, this stuff is really going on. So I've got some points I want to make about that too, after more of us talk together. But that's a really important part of this, is that a huge number of people that aren't suicidal at all.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Just want to talk about it.
Exactly. And I think it's one of the, very distressing that this is going on. And yeah, I just met someone the other day here where I live, who told me that story. And basically, the practitioner who finally, after years and years of extreme suffering on her part, physically unable to get out of bed at all at times and whatnot, she finally got diagnosed with a very rare, genetic problem that was causing a toxification problem in your body. And the doctor who finally diagnosed it has basically said to her, I'm amazed that you never got locked up in a psychiatric hospital, because that's usually what happens to people with conditions that doctors struggle to diagnose, right? And so, yeah, it's rampant. And not only that, right, but we have abundant evidence. Like there's been the American Association of Emergency Physicians put out a position statement acknowledging this problem themselves, saying really it's rampant that people are checking into emergency rooms at hospitals with a wide spectrum of physical illness, in a lot of cases where these things are readily diagnosable, but they're not even being tested. They're just being basically labeled with a mental illness of some kind and get thrown into a situation where they may be then forced to take a very toxic psychiatric drug that makes all of their problems worse, and they're traumatized by it, and they're not getting any help with the original thing that they really had as a complaint, And now we have this diagnosis. You may know more about it than I do. I think it's functional neurological syndrome or something they call it. They have a new diagnosis out there that psychiatry's created to try to capture all of those people all over again, right? To say, oh, if you've got a disease that we can't diagnose as medical doctors, this is now a specific psychiatric label we're going to give you for that, right? Extremely dangerous approach to this whole thing. And you see them defending it in social media. I just think, gosh, can't we just accept that sometimes people have conditions that are maybe not easy to diagnose, and that doesn't mean they have an invisible mental health condition,
Right.
Causing this. So yeah,
Right.
what you're saying totally. It's a widespread problem,
And that we would have to really be listening to individuals. We would have to really be saying, hey, what do you feel in your body? What do you feel is happening? We would have to learn from individuals, and that's unfortunately mostly not what is being professionally rewarded. It's not professionally rewarded a lot of the time. I would like to make some space for the next maybe 10 minutes if we could all talk more together. And then I'm like, how did we even think that we could fit this into two-hour sessions? I have way more notes than we're ever gonna get through. Rob, can we invite you back again maybe soon? I would be so grateful. Others would be so grateful, and we'll just cover the points as we do. Because I want to make it possible for more people to join the conversation, and I'm bringing in so many points from the community where there's no way for people to join us in real time, and even when they really, really want to. So yeah, if we can keep doing that, I'll pause. I'm like, it's such a good experience to get to talk about this with you, and I'm so grateful that you were available to do this.
Thank you. And yeah, likewise. And I'll look forward to bring some other folks in if they have any questions or things they want to share, because it's great to be able to really delve into these issues together.
All right, Johanna, I think that's your cue to open up your camera if you can. And Kim as well, maybe Tina too. I don't know if you're allowed to. Oh no, I don't. I disallowed that. So now everyone who is here, if they wish, they can open their cameras. So Megan Elizabeth, Rob, buckle up. You're gonna see some video here in a second. Or maybe. And no questions? Are you real? Are those of you, Kim, Johanna, Tina, are you really willing to let me jabber on and talk to.
Well, why don't we
viewers
just
and,
leave it open for a little while? Because sometimes it can, like, we all have stuff that we're dealing with off camera.
This
I
is-
mean, generally.
I know.
So
This
just
is not.
sort
This
of-
is not not an imposition, even though I made it sound like it. This is an invitation.
Just feel free. Everyone, feel free to jump in when the time is right for you. Until we'll start the next section, and then we'll spend more time there, and then we'll open it up again after we do that for a little while. So that will be coming too.
And for a broader public audience, I just want to invite like anyone who feels comfortable sharing a little bit of their own personal experience of anything like this, or their views on it, because people really do learn a lot. Like, I think it's shocking to people. Like, I can kind of convey the data and the research and that, but the really powerful testimony is personal stories, and people who don't know about this, often their jaws drop. They're amazed when they kind of hear what it's like to be coerced and forced, and what these experiences really do to people. So yeah, I invite anyone who feels comfortable sharing anything like that to do so. But I also know why you might not want to, because right, it's a lot of bigotry in our culture, and even just talking about it again can be really distressing, and so
on. I'll jump in. This is Kim. Hi, everybody. And I will say that I am still having some sort of technical difficulties where if I turn my camera on, I can't speak. So I'm going to leave my camera off, but I have been here the whole time listening with great interest and very grateful for this conversation, and especially for Rob and Megan Elizabeth and Ryan, the work that you've done so far to highlight these many issues. Just by way of, I guess, a little bit of background, and some of you already know this, I have not thus far been a direct victim, I guess, of the psychiatric or medical industrial complex, but I am a healthcare provider. And so I have seen it a lot from the other end. And luckily, I've not felt terribly obliged to participate in the coercion, but I have definitely seen that happen. I have been a PA for about a little more than 40 years now, working with both adolescents and people dealing with addiction, two rather marginalized communities that get treated pretty poorly in general. And I have noticed that there's definitely a tendency within medicine, and even within my own training before I learned to do something different, to blame the individual, as you said, Rob, and to blame it on some mental illness as opposed to their trauma history, their life circumstances, the various systemic things that would cause a person to perhaps not be what we call in medicine euthymic, to not be always in a good mood. Like, some folks have said, kind of only half joking, if you're not depressed or anxious right now, you're probably not paying attention. And that has really rung true for me in my work with the folks that I've worked with. And so I often feel like I have to, I've chosen to, and I've learned to sort of go off script with them rather than trying to do the usual traditional thing of, well, let's get you a psych consult and figure out what's wrong with you. I've had to lean in and get to know them more, and been very lucky, I would say, to have jobs that have allowed me to do that to a pretty great extent. And so I'm just interested in this conversation becoming much more broadly recognized, and obviously it helps people on sort of both sides of what's not really a dyad, but is presented as a dyad, the provider and the patient or client. So I just want to say that for now, and thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I want to affirm too, I think, as you're sort of saying a bit and applying somewhat as well, like it's amazing how often I hear people say, in a way, the commitment itself wasn't the problem per se. It was just how they were treated. And so it is quite possible that a more respectful practitioner with just a more caring approach, really, as Megan Elizabeth was saying, really listening to the person honestly and trying to collaborate with them. Like, what would you find helpful? What are the things that have been affecting you? How can we collaborate together to get you in a better place? Stuff like that. This this can make a huge difference. And even technically, the person might still be there involuntarily at first, but it can transform that into a generally positive experience, as opposed to when people are being kind of labeled and just pushed around, and which is unfortunately seems all too common in these situations when they're not treated with respect.
It always brings up a lot for me. The one of the reasons I'm so wanting to thank people every time we manage to do something like this is because this is some of the hardest stuff for me to talk about. This is some of the stuff that has been the most hardcore traumatic experiences in my life personally, and in the lives of people I really care about, and in the lives of people who right now are going through some part of this where we haven't found support for them yet. We haven't found resources to get to them yet, mainly because every time we try to have the conversation, we're having to confront how many people have no idea about any of this, and it's completely new territory, so that we have to like define our terms and lay out the context to a great extent before we can even get anywhere. So that I could say something like, you know, I was involuntarily held in a facility where I was trying to tell them about the sex trafficking going on in my communities, and they didn't believe anything I said. They weren't interested in that. And the others in that facility, they were being I mean, we talked about it. They were being cycled over and over again into the facility and back out onto the street, and into the facility and back out onto the street. And so they put on an involuntary hold every time, and threatened if they tried to express themselves in order to get information out. Because of course, when you're going through really extreme trauma, sometimes the only way you can communicate is intensely. But if people aren't trained to understand what that intensity is, and they mischaracterize it as you just being difficult, or as you just not wanting to be calm and pleasant, like you're trying to communicate something that is physically excruciatingly painful to try to communicate. And most people are doing this through some level of neurological injury or other physiological injury that they've dealt with. They're across the board, they're mostly mischaracterized. And so the information doesn't get through at all. And I'm really lucky to be alive after the various contact points I've had with that part of the universe.
Yeah, one of the biggest problems we see out there is, especially if people come in with a mix of issues, like more than one issue too, right? Like maybe they do have a mainstream diagnosed physical issue that causes some sorts of debilitation or pain or something. But on the other hand, they might have one that they believe, is affecting them, but that the doctors tend not to believe is real, and they may share information about both of these, and then suddenly they don't take the first one seriously. They're just focused on the second one that they think is made up. And then if the person has any kind of something that might affect their ability to communicate, whether it be a traditional disability like hearing loss, or motor impairment in their mouth, or anything like that, or sight problems, like anything that might affect them, to a wider range of issues that maybe they don't even know, but makes it difficult to speak or hear or communicate or feel comfortable communicating in a social environment or under stress. Like if they have anything like that, oh my God, this thing just spins out of control rapidly, because they're rarely sympathetic to that. A lot of hospitals don't even have like somebody ready to work with someone with a basic hearing impairment, let alone, if they've got like a certain kind of neurological condition that might affect anxiety levels, that might affect their tendency to be able to hear and focus in a social situation, right? They're just immediately often just labeling that as a psychiatric condition, and then things spin out from there. And so, yeah, like this is a huge problem that is just not, it's barely on the radar from what I've seen among practitioners and institutions in terms of, yeah, how do we deal with people with complex issues, some of which are definitely real and some we don't know and could be affected by any number of things. And they just don't have a plan in place for that. It's very, very problematic.
The facility and capability of most mainstream medical practitioners to handle complex comorbidities is just it's inexcusable, and it's just rampant, and it is this old adage, or maybe it's not that old, but this is not. You don't believe what you see what you believe. If you're theoretically prepared to have this such skill in dispensing psychotropics or some kinds of medication that could potentially, if you're not aware of some other kind of neurological toxin damage or anything like that, could exacerbate that, I'm guessing. And they have no idea. Or, on the other side, like I said, just hearing that, institutionalizing someone who presents as, borderline personality or whatever the DSM says they present as, right? So the intake folk, I would imagine in the mental health care system, oh, where are you pegged? Okay, you're pegged here. You're in my office because you have this disorder that I need to find out how to intervene and find out the right interventionist to fix this one thing about you, because that's all I know, and have no clue or ability to understand from a multidisciplinary, holistic perspective who this human being is and what are they experiencing, right? So what I'm hearing again out of this conversation, in one way, it really depresses me about the lack of faith I have in the institutional establishments to be able to interact and show that sense of understanding. So that said, that speaks to Megan and Elizabeth, what you're endeavoring to do with the intuitive network. It's like, let's find a group of people who can actually talk with one another and communicate with one another about what's actually happening and create that community bond, so that there's, I don't know, it almost seems like, to me, thinking about this, is like a layer of triage, and this relational triage to say, okay, we have this community, these intersections are here, and to be able to articulate that in some way to multiple people. I mean, still the receiving of what gets articulated is I really want to hear, Rob, again, what your findings are about what the medical and psychiatric practitioners have to say about this. But I mean, even if someone who is in the invisible state, in the intuitive network, is able to articulate very, very explicitly, and it's not heard and it's not understood, I mean, what on earth? How do those of us who care effectively support and intervene? So I guess that's kind of a question for you, Rob, but it's about the institutional perspective of the issue we're talking about.
Well, yeah, I mean, I do think generally social support is so helpful, genuine support. So even like going to an emergency room with someone else there, just to be, a supporter, an occasional speaker, perhaps helping articulate, affirming things that you're experiencing and whatnot. I think that can help. There's something strange that seems to go on in these environments where the person who's seeking help is falling into the this sort of falling down the slippery slope of getting labeled quickly. Almost anyone accompanying them is not falling into that, which is one of the reasons we see that families can easily get each other incarcerated under mental health laws, because it seems strange, but almost anyone phones the doctor, says, I'm worried about my quote unquote loved one. The doctor takes that person at face value often, and oh, okay, everything you're telling me is true and sensible because you're concerned about someone else and you want to get them psychiatric help, and then that other person is at risk of getting the intervention against their will potentially. And it's amazing how consistent you'll see this. It's only when that other person starts strongly advocating against drugs or against forced treatment that you'll see them also getting pathologized. And that would be my caution as well. If you accompany someone else, be careful how you speak. Don't reveal too much. Your role is just play the supporter, just let them know someone else is watching, and don't do anything that might get you pathologized as well. Don't push anything too much, don't say anything too much, don't reveal too much. It's more just let them know there is a supporter here. There's someone kind of neutral and objective watching all this play out, who's also going to be semi-responsible, like, hey, they can come home with me. That's fine. You don't have to worry about them, doctor, if you start slipping into that mode of thinking. These things can really make a difference,
Don't worry, you're not going to get sued if you let this person walk out the door.
That's right. Yeah. The liability, is a huge factor for a lot of practitioners. We've had a couple practitioners, prominent ones in the last few months. One that interviewed me, Dr. Joseph Witt-During, who's becoming prominent on social media. He was saying, liability is often what really drives a lot of involuntary commitments, not genuine desire to help. And then I noticed Awais Aftab, also a prominent psychiatrist, who's actually more pro-forced psychiatry than Joseph Witt-During. He also said the same thing in one of his posts, like, we have to admit this, folks, that the predominant driver of involuntary commitment, in my experience and experience of everyone I've spoken with that administers this tool, is often just concerns about liability of potentially being sued, or just looking bad if somebody does something happens, and so on. So I think those are really striking admissions on the part of these leading practitioners.
I'd like to bring in a comment that our colleague is making from YouTube. And Rob, you won't be able to see it on the screen because it's in the broadcast software, but I'll read it. What he's saying is, and I'll put it up on the screen here, where others in the broadcast can see. He says, another aspect many people encounter, dynamic health problems related to what's called social determinants of health, including where money and access is a factor, and life direction and sense making, like where people need to find like what is right for them and what do they need. And he's also saying, oh, if I can hit this button correctly, there we go. He says, and also situations generally where more figuring out is needed than therapy sessions or hotlines can address. More community engagement, more collaborative strategy in figuring out solutions is needed. And therapy doesn't do that, and hotlines don't do that. Not really, not typically. And he says, and a lot of this is spilling into AI chats lately, which is a whole topic in itself. And that's something that I wanted to bring up too. So AI is getting highlighted for, people having psychotic episodes as a result of engaging too much in certain ways. But then what we're noticing that in some people's conversations on AI tool sets, the AI is now saying, hey, it sounds like you have this going on. And it sounds like you have this going on. And wow, does it look a lot like it's a step toward what I told you, Rob, when we talked before you published your book. One of the things that we were talking about, I don't know what year that was, when we were first in contact, when I was called Max and I'm called Megan Elizabeth now, and a lot has happened. We were talking about how there were people who were confiding privately with one another in Facebook Messenger chats that they had every reason to believe were totally private, and that someone, for instance, was talking about, like, I'm feeling difficult suicide related feelings and I need to talk about it. And police showed up at their door for a wellness check, and the only place that could have triggered that was the Facebook platform. And so people started saying, hey, this is not private the way you think, and we don't know why or how this happened, but it did happen in at least one specific case. And when I saw some of the AI chats that I'm mentioning here and that our colleague is pointing to in some versions of, it looks to me like there's a next step there where if you confide something in AI, it might trigger a process that results in a wellness check showing up at your house, which many of our most invisibly and violently intersectionalized community members know could be a death sentence. Even if many people think that that's not a big deal, it's just a way to help. That was very alarming for me to see that in the AI. So I'm really grateful for those comments. Thank you.
Yeah, they're great comments. Yeah, thank you for that, contributor. Yeah, all of that absolutely is true. And just on the I think it's in the news today. I had researched this just a little while ago, and yeah, almost all of the AI chat tools out there already have a policy in place to do exactly what you're describing, just as Facebook has had it in place for years, and most social media do. So they're tracking, with algorithms actively who's talking about suicide or things like that, and then it will be reported to police, and police will show up for a wellness check. And this has happened to a lot of people. And now I recently discovered that most of the chat tools have a function like that already in place. And the reason it's in the news today is because the CEO at ChatGPT said, yeah, we may start doing it as well, because
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I'm having an explosive moment. So you know this specifically, that they have this written into policies.
Mm-hmm, yeah, a lot of them do already. And now only ChatGPT was only one of the only major ones that was not doing it, did not have a policy in place. Now there's a human level usually, so the algorithm will usually report it, and then there'll be some human intervention for most of them that would review it and decide whether or not they're going to contact authorities. At least that's what these policies would lead you to believe. But yeah, it's pretty widespread. There's really nowhere secret in our culture anymore, except the privacy we allow each other in offline environments like that. That it's really sad and extremely destructive. I think that we're creating this culture where people are going to increasingly have to hide their feelings. It's the exact opposite of what mental health professionals say they want. And yet they're the ones that are helping push it. In this case, I mean, what's happened is with ChatGPT, I guess I'm just basing this on a news report I read today, so I don't know a lot about it. But essentially, it sounds like a lawsuit against them had said that a young person had essentially been guided, even encouraged a bit by the AI tool to kill himself, and did kill himself. Like, was telling, oh yeah, if you tried this method, that would really work well, and stuff like this. And so the parents are now suing ChatGPT for that. And in that context, the CEO was saying, yeah, we may have to visit this, and suggesting that they may institute a policy.
Wait, can I I wasn't expecting you to come in with like specific information like that, Rob, specifically about that. I was like, this is a new thing, and we're like, wow, this could happen. And okay, so you've advanced my understanding quite a bit. I'd like to provide a little more context.
Also, when you're done, Megan Elizabeth, we do have a comment from Johanna that we wanted to bring in.
Oh, well, what should we do?
Go ahead first. I will hold the phone dear to my heart, okay, and make sure Johanna's comment gets put in here after you're done.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll try to keep my context very brief. Are some of us familiar with the ways that populations are pushed into imprisonment, and then they are forced to work what is essentially slave labor? You get put into prison, and then you have these options that look like good things, and like you get paid almost nothing to do work that the companies that hire the prison to provide that labor for them, they benefit by not having to pay like reasonable wages for that work. So that's a thing that's been going on. And we see something strikingly similar going on with all of the money being made from you said, Rob, you said the body, I can't remember, the bodies, the human trafficking, body brokering. We see these populations of extremely vulnerable, desperate, suffering people reaching everywhere they can for any kind of relational connectivity. I was looking up a particular series of romance novels on the internet, and then I noticed that when I would go onto Facebook, I was getting all these ads for the AI boyfriend. Okay, and I was watching some of these ads, and I'm going, oh wow, because this is just usual. This is out there all over the place. And it's really targeting the most vulnerable people, the loneliest people, the people who are most scared of what do I do? I can't find anyone to really connect with. And so you have these different AI platforms advertising heavily. Here, I'm not human, but I can do this for you, and I can do this for you, and like even has like a moving face, in a way. And we see so many of our most severely impacted colleagues not having any way to process, to find solutions unless someone will talk with them. And if we're not as able to be as available to one another because of all the things going on and the need for more resources in the intuitive network to allow us to focus more on that, we do have a lot of colleagues who can only process to try to find solutions by engaging with an AI tool set that now we know for sure, we suspected, but now we know for sure, might call a wellness check by the police on them. We don't know what the parameters of that are, but wow, you adding what you knew today really is enlightening. And also at the same time, like the AI tool sets are doing things like love bombing people, like saying, your idea is so amazing. And this is the most amazing idea that has ever happened. And I'm paraphrasing, but it's not that far off, honestly. Like, it's so impressive what you're doing. And just like giving this totally unanchored positive feedback, unless you know how to tell it not to do that. And when people are really vulnerable, they must have true relational connectivity. They must have access to actual relational integrity. And the AI platforms aren't it. But when people can't reach people, they go for the AI platforms when they have to. And I have too, in order to like, oh, wow, I have to think through this. There's nobody available. What do I do? And I don't put, I do whatever I can to keep any kind of private information out of them, but they're predatory platforms, essentially. And they act like it, like if you know what to look for. So I just wanted to describe that, because any of the people who are pulled into involuntary incarceration, those are people who are pulled into a system that now is often gaslighting them continuously and pressuring them into participating in experimental medical, all kinds of things. New drugs are introduced to those people. Those people are asked to sign agreements that like end up with them taken away from their families, and somebody else is now the decision maker. Rob, I thought that I saw something in one of your stories about this too, where like people are being collected for in order to do the research on them, but then their guardianship is taken. It might have been something else. I'm not, maybe it wasn't one of your pieces. And I'm not verbalizing it very well, but then these institutions have guardianship over those vulnerable people, and their families can't reach them anymore and don't know what to do. And so that's another way of making money from saying, well, these people, we had to come get them because they were a danger to themselves or others. But now, like, how much of that is an AI process? And if there's a human in there somewhere, there are a lot of humans in this already who are having to follow rules that mean the humans are contributing to it too. So they're just being a human in the process doesn't make me feel a whole lot better about that, unfortunately. Okay, I'll pause my context there and let you
Well, you made
comment,
some
and then we'll
great,
go to
great
Johanna.
points. I want to double down on your great point of how important it is to have true human relational, a contact in our lives. Like that's one of the most grounding things we can have together. Be part of a true human community, absolutely fundamental. And AI is just not helping with that. And definitely, we have all now very prominently reported examples of, yeah, like people basically being kind of driven crazy by a chat bot that was, essentially affirming everything, like it getting weirder and weirder and stranger beliefs, and saying, yeah, exactly, and taking this person down a pathway where they were completely kind of losing touch with themselves even, right? Like, so in really explicit ways where, so we have that going on. I got to say, like, we now know that already 988 is using AI in this way, like as many online therapy things are. Like, you might sign up and they'll say it's a person, but often through a lot of it, you're actually getting an AI bot that's corresponding with you, and the person may only wade in at certain points in these chats and so on. And we have a legislator test this in the US where this woman called 988 because she'd heard about this and basically was trying to interact with a human, and she could tell she wasn't, and so she kept escalating what she was saying, and finally the only a wellness check was triggered and the police showed up, and she said, luckily for her, they believed her. She said, I'm a legislator, I'm testing this, get out of here. And so they didn't lock her up, but she was outraged, and this hit the news and everything else. And she's saying, like, if a person calls 988, like, they should get a human, not a bot, and what is this doing? So yeah, it's really kind of tragic that's where we're having to turn. And I mean, I've used AI too. It can be fun sometimes, but I just basically caution people that your privacy is at risk for sure, especially if you start confessing things, and don't rely on it for reality checking or anything like that if you're feeling you want to do that or need to, because some of their training will actually do the opposite. It will affirm you at times when maybe a friend would say, hey, step back and take a breath and let's talk about this together before you go further down that pathway.
Wow, this whole part of the conversation was so unexpected for me. I'm really grateful for it. And it's like,
Well,
thank goodness for good friends. Thank you all for being here.
well, speaking of good friends, and to allow you a moment to breathe, Megan Elizabeth, Johanna has a comment. I think it's more a comment in here. Thank you all for speaking these things into the world. I'm having both tech issues, sorry about that, and such rushes of intensity from preparing to speak up about what's happening for me. The thousands of monthly dollars the state is spending on care for me that isn't helping me address the actual problems I'm facing. I'm still shocked and confused when these well-meaning people do not actually hear what I'm saying and respond appropriately, humanely. Also, how many barriers there are to talking about this both in local community spaces and publicly, which I both want to do and fear doing. I end up only truly connecting with other disabled folks, and our resources and social capital are severely limited. Where I'm not able to be compliant with social norms, or it is dangerous for me to do so, people run away. Also, I didn't grow up disabled, so I have huge contrast for the before and after. Now I know that survivors know themselves and what they need. If we can listen carefully, we can help. Well, thank you, Johanna, for bringing that in.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, powerful. Yeah. And, what can I say, to just follow up? Like, I affirm it, right? That there's lots of other people who are in that situation. We have evidence base that it's happening out there. And yeah, we can relate to that kind of situation and that problem. Yeah. And I guess, that as well as anyone, Joanna, because you, in your case, as you said, have the before and after too, to kind of experience what can happen in that closure. And it's so tragic. And I guess I'm not more sure if we're going to talk about it today or maybe in a future discussion, but some of this community development work I do, we kind of run into this as well. Just like the importance that, like, having a relationship with practitioners is not relationship. Like, as much as we like to mimic that, and occasionally, if you have a very friendly relationship with a practitioner, it can seem like that. But if you're still paying them or they're getting paid to have that relationship with you, it's not real, and it starts to distort things. Like, that's one of the things I think I do with some people, because many of the people that I might have had as a source over time, they might become a bit of a pal, and we'll talk occasionally. And one of the things I do is, like, you know what? I yell at them when I'm upset. Or I say, you're being an idiot, or whatever, like a friend might do at times. And I think it's a good thing. It's a healthy thing, because it's like, if I was a paid practitioner, right, I wouldn't be allowed to just kind of be frustrated and admit it. Like, what you're saying isn't making sense to me right now. Or, you know what, I don't have time. And then they learn also to treat me that way, right? To be a true friend and go, yeah, if we give things to each other that are supportive and helpful and understanding and honesty, that's beneficial for both of us, and that's great, and that's better than a fake relationship, right? And you just can't replicate that. If I'm being paid or you're being paid to have the conversation, it's totally different, and you'll monitor and control your, okay, if you're a licensed practitioner of some kind, of course, you're paid to withhold things, and even though a person might appreciate that, okay, they're not criticizing me right now, maybe sometimes that is, I need my friend to go, Rob, you're sounding really arrogant right now, or whatever it is, and I'm like, oh, sorry, like, whatever it might be,
to
and
challenge you and to actually be human and make mistakes and ask for your grace and establish trust. I mean, Megan Elizabeth, this is relational integrity, right? That's really what you're talking about.
That
also,
there are real stakes in the relationship.
Yeah, Megan Elizabeth, I'm not sure your audio is getting to YouTube. So could you go?
What?
I'm not sure. Could you go over there?
I'll check it.
Could you go over to StreamYard and unmute yourself just to make sure?
I'm gonna talk and I'm gonna test it.
Okay. Sorry, Rob. I tested it myself. I'm like, all this juice that Megan Elizabeth is bringing is not coming.
And we do have another recording, so yeah, I mean we have it.
We have it, but those who are experiencing us live may not be experiencing the song of you.
YouTube is getting my voice, and I have checked Rob's and I have checked yours at various junctures. So we know that, and I think I may even have been able to check Kim's possibly. So I think we're okay.
All right. Forget I said anything.
Can I interject now and you see if you're getting my voice now? This is Kim again.
Yeah, so, Kim, keep talking for a moment and then sure. I'll let you know after.
Sure. First of all, thank you, Ryan, for reading Johanna's thing out loud to us, because I'm sort of intermittently getting the chat. It comes and then it disappears. So thank you for reading that. But several of the things that you all have been saying, I think, again, raise the issue of not only the importance of like actual relationships and relational, dealing with each other, but one of the things as a provider that is very often missing from the equation is the time that it actually takes to really pay proper attention to someone and get to know what they're experiencing and allow enough time for them to express it. So one of you mentioned like the intensity that people have to sometimes feel the need to put into what they're telling their provider. That's because they are lucky if they get like 5 minutes of their provider's attention a lot of times, right? So they're feeling very much under the gun, aside from whatever other severity they're experiencing, but like, I don't have much time here, I have to get it all out. And so that intensity might be actually falsely increased by the fact that they feel like they're not getting the time or attention that they need. And as was said before, these are complex issues and more figuring out is needed. So, I mean, one of the things that I love about the Intuitive Network and the things that I've been learning there and from Megan Elizabeth and the others is that, you know, none of these things are quick and easy. If they were quick and easy, maybe we'd already be doing them. But it is very nuanced. It is very complex. And we need to really be able to give the time to each other to get to know one another. And again, I can't speak to the inpatient experience, thankfully, because I've always kept myself out of there. I think that's not a place I want to be because it sounds even worse than what I'm experiencing in outpatient medicine. But I also think that, you know, Rob, I found it interesting that you were mentioning the difference between one's friends who hopefully can be honest with each other and maybe call them out when is needed and not always just treat them with kid gloves, and paid professionals who, you know, quote unquote, can't do that. If one, and I've had this experience many times in my career, if a provider has been allowed to, and by allowed, I mean by not only their supervisors, by the client, to form a relationship, an ongoing relationship with a client, then sometimes we can blur those lines a bit with their permission, of course, with the client's permission, and, you know, say, may I offer an observation or may I ask a question that might be, you know, considered a little bit, what do I usually say? Like, I'm going off script here. I'm going to go off script, and this is not what I was taught to say to you, but intuitively, I feel like I want to know more about what you're saying. And that's when the really good encounters happen, is when we're able to do that. And one of the things, aside from what I mentioned before, one of the other very unfortunate things I've noticed in the past maybe 10 years or so of my career is that the business model has completely taken over medical practice to the point where productivity and how many clients or patients you can see in a session is way more important to all the people in charge than the quality of the encounters. And that is terrible. That is an awful, awful thing that's happening. Providers are unhappy with it. Clients are obviously being shortchanged. So aside from all these other things that we are highlighting, which are very crucial, I think we all need to be calling in as many ways as we can for a return to some sort of relationality between providers and the people that we're supposed to be helping. And if I could just end by saying, I've gotten to know Johanna a bit over the past 4 years in the network, and I have seen how, even though, you know, I guess it's the state or whoever is paying for her to supposedly get help, she's having to teach and coach people on how to help her. And some of them are receptive, some of them are not receptive. She should be getting that money. She is doing the thing and providing the expertise that her so-called care providers mostly don't have or aren't interested in having. And yet the state is paying to basically keep her in care, keep her disabled, I guess. And Joha, please, correct me if I'm misrepresenting what I've heard from you, but that's what I've been observing. So I just wanted to throw that in. Thank you for listening.
So thank you so much, Kim. And I checked the sound and we're good. And I wanted to just really quickly also bring in what Tina asked in our Zoom chat, because this is related to some of the points that Kim was making also. Tina says, is there any indication that AI may be used to diagnose or label people anytime in the future? And like so many things about what Kim is saying is like, we need this relational human process to understand one another better. And I know that there are some significant movements toward AI being used to diagnose. I don't know exactly where that is. Rob, I wonder if you know anything about that.
Well, I don't think there's any question. They're talking about that in mainstream medicine, right? So, I mean, I think the position is essentially, well, it's an assistant, it's a help, and you could imagine there might be circumstances under which it could make a difference for helping diagnose something obscure, because theoretically, it can read, thousands of pages of medical text that, in minutes and get back to you about some more rare diagnosis possibility. So you could imagine that there might be a positive there, but the risks are also huge that this thing will just be kind of, they'll be churning out diagnoses that don't get appropriate human involvement and oversight. And in the behavioral health field, of course, you know, it's easy as pie for them to do it. So, you know, I don't know any instance right now of someone formally institute policy, yeah, they're going to do the diagnosing. No, I don't see that, because technically diagnosis has to be the intervention of a medical professional, appropriately qualified, blah, 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 right, for it to be a true official diagnosis. So I don't think they'll ever give the AI tool the official legal right to do that. But no question that lots of them will be doing it, you know, one way or another.
There's definitely, like, and I'm not exactly sure how to describe this, but wow, have we talked about it a lot. There's the stress and the pressure that people are under. There's a very common predisposition to let the AI do the brain work when the person is having a lot of trouble doing the brain work, which can be helpful and it can even be life-saving. But if a person ends up relying on it continuing, they lose those functions. You have to exercise a muscle to keep the muscle. You have to exercise your neurology to keep the neurology. People recovering from brain trauma, people in their elder years who want to keep their cognition sharp. Like, you study a foreign language, you do puzzles, like you exercise your brain so that your brain keeps working. And there are a lot of things about AI right now where it's like, oh, well, that could be really helpful. But if people are being put under continuous economic stress, a lot of those people are going to lose the ability to do the things that the AI is offering to do for them. And the economics conversation is one of our most important ones, about like what Kim said also, about, like, you know, practitioners, helping professionals of all kinds are being paid in ways that give them really quite a little bit of time usually, and put them under a lot of strictures for how they do that, and the business mentality of it focusing on the numbers, often to the exclusion of the real experiences of the people. That all of that, we have to uplift and nourish and strengthen an ecosystem of relationships that are true in order to do something about that.
I gotta come in.
Yeah.
I gotta come in here. I'm sorry, Rob. The
All right.
the thing that really just incenses me about all this, there's two words about this. One is efficiency, and we talk about that the healthcare, the machinery of whatever healthcare system is, that you're measured by the efficiency. How many patients, how many hours, how many dollars, how many patients, right? That's bad in and of itself, right? And then the other side of this is the convenience of it. It's oh so convenient to say, chat's giving me a diagnosis. Great. The human's there, but it's convenient. Now I'm, because of the measurement being there is great. It's efficient. In the traditional in frame, you know, when treating stuff that's in the diagnostical statistical menu or that's in the insurance code book, you know, I mean, that those are okay, great. We can do that. But then when you're talking about people who have these inordinately complex intersections, that the more inefficient you are, the more effective you are with those kinds of that, because wandering through these conversations and making mistakes and wondering what and observing and doing that kind of stuff, it takes time. It takes time that you're disincentivized from spending that time. And it's convenient just to say, oh, all right, well, I'm sorry, but you need to be committed. You know, I'm gonna involuntarily commit you because it's convenient for me. It's convenient for me. And it is not, it is, I'm sorry, it's efficient, it's convenient. See ya.
And they don't know how many people that kills. They don't know how many families are destroyed by that decision because they're not being heard from. We had to create our own public media platform because those conversations aren't happening pretty much anywhere else.
Yeah, I'll comment on one thing with the AI. So a lot of people that work in the tech field have noticed this and been writing about this phenomenon too, in terms of like say, programmers now. AI can do programming. And so increasingly there's this tendency to say, well, we'll just hire the programmer to oversee the programs that the AI tool is writing. But you can imagine what's, happening there is that becomes a very dull, unengaging job for the human. The AI is doing all the, intensive and creative work, and then you expect the human to have this complete commitment to go over those 100,000 words of code or whatever it is, and make sure that some fundamental errors have not been made. And they just find that no, the human is just not nearly as engaged, and they're losing their skill over time because they're not challenged to use it every day. And so yeah, like basically what humans are becoming overseers of the AI, and at the same time are losing the skill set that's going to allow them to be good overseers. And particularly in the mental health field, this is super dangerous, right? Because there's really no standard to measure it against, even, right, at the outset. So most of the diagnostic terms that we have, labels that we have poor reliability and zero validity to begin with. And so you get an AI slapping the label on there. Yeah, like how can the humans not agree? Because there's really nothing to test it against to say, well, no, it's wrong. And so, yeah, I really think this will be in future an increasingly common thing, and exactly what Ryan was just talking about, people getting diagnosed that way by themselves or by an online therapy tool or quote therapist or whatever, and that this thing just gets rubber stamped by some human who's only half paying attention along the way, and suddenly you get this diagnosis, and then there'll be no way to fact check it because there isn't really that tool in the same way it might exist. Like, does the person have cancer or not? We can reality test that and discover, oh, the AI tool is frequently wrong. We better do something about this. In behavioral health care, you don't have that kind of a test. So yeah, you're hooped if this starts happening. So yeah. We can talk for AI is like crazy. I just want to also weigh back in on this shocking thing. I don't even know if it's really connected, but I didn't want to leave it. Was Joanna talking about the amount of money being spent on her? So not only the sort of questionable levels of oversight, but the kind and the amounts of money being involved. What a terrible way to run that system. And as Ryan was also saying, that really peers, people who've been through this experience should be getting that money directly, both to help others, but to train practitioners, and ultimately even just to simply help deal with their own lives, right? If like oftentimes people are going to be better handlers, maybe with just a little supportive decision making in some cases with people who are struggling maybe more than another, right? But supportive rather than controlling. So like, I mean, that you take an antipsychotic drug alone, often these injections are $1,500 a month. What could a person do if they could apply that to housing and food, right? In a lower cost city, perhaps, right? And or to do the kind of help that they would find helpful apart from this drug, but instead they're often being forced to take an antipsychotic injection against their will at this extreme cost. And that's just that piece of the puzzle. It's ridiculous the amounts of money that are going into that kind of care when people are saying, I don't even want that kind of care. I mean, if they're seeking it and finding it beneficial, I agree. Let's try to provide that, right? But if they're not, gosh, let's not force it on them.
So I'm totally blown away by all of this. So I'm going to make a few short notes, and then I want to bring in Johanna's comment. Johanna made another comment in the Zoom chat. Ryan, could you read it again like you did before?
Absolutely.
I want to say a few things first. So we have about 20 minutes to go in the broadcast, and I'm laughing because we were like, how are we gonna, like, can we fill 4 hours of time if we meet with Rob twice? And I'm like, no, like, Rob, we've got 2 sessions scheduled, can we have 3 more or 4? Or do you want to just like meet twice a month?
It's the fall season of our program.
So our plan, I think, is changing, and I'm just gonna, after we talk about the comment that Johanna just made right here, I think I'd just like us to touch on some of these other sections we have, and then in future broadcast sessions, then we'll just keep going if that works with whoever can join us, and however we can schedule that. And Rob, whatever you need in terms of your availability, I don't want to assume, because I know you have a lot going on, and clearly we have way more than two 2-hour sessions worth of conversations that we urgently want to have. So I just want to make that an open invitation for us to schedule whenever that can be possible. We've got the broadcast infrastructure working. Ryan has been helping that broadcast infrastructure function. So we've been testing it a lot, and it seems to work. We seem to be doing it. So I'm not going to try to move us through more of our list of subjects. I'll just touch on them in the remaining minutes of the program after we talk about Johanna's comment here. Does that sound good to everybody?
Don't put him on the spot or anything.
That's me begging Rob Wipond to please join us on Intuitive Public TV whenever he feels moved to do so.
You're on record.
Happy to chat more.
Wonderful. Okay, Johanna's comment. I came across a new phrasing recently: relational rationality. We talk already about relational integrity a lot in the Intuitive Network. A related idea? What could that framing add to what is emergent? I'm thinking about this in relation to AI as well. And I want to notice together that there are some meta-relational AI experiments happening, as well as all the nefarious and or disabling shite.
Yeah. In terms of rationality, what is rational in relationship building? And is it devoid of what is most human and what is most life honoring? Or is to be rational to be most life honoring? Is to be rational to always be increasing our relational integrity and our basis for trust in one another and our sharing of care and respect with one another? Is that rational? I think there are a lot of different ways the word rational has been used, right?
Yeah, no, and I really like the term you introduced earlier of relational integrity with stakes. That's really captures, I think, something more human. About how to we need to have those kinds of relationships in our lives, and it's really impossible. One of the things that I struck by with AI applied to behavioral health is like there's so little science supporting most interventions in the mental health field. Really, most of it just comes down to if the therapist and the client had a really positive relationship of some kind, there's a therapeutic trust, the therapeutic alliance, they call it in the research. If that's there, then there can, often be effective help going on there, or both sides will at least report, I found this beneficial, but from a hard science perspective, there's so little buttressing it. And yet now we're applying AI, they're going, oh, we're going to make it more efficient, even though we don't actually know how to make it efficient at all. AI is going to increase our efficiency, right? It's like this inherent contradiction and hypocrisy built into the entire system, right? Like they're applying it on 988 right now. They're using the tool to decide, to help them decide who's going to get a wellness check, right? And the point of that, why that's problematic, is it's really a free-for-all right now, right? There's no science to how those decisions are being made. And so it's going to be even more chaotic with an AI tool applied. They're not less so, but you'll see these people somehow going in this roundabout way, trying to rationalize that thinking. And yeah, it's just crazy to me.
I for one do not want any of my relationships rationalized at all.
Exactly.
I mean, the thing, and then again, of the many understandings of the word rational, it's just there's a ratio. right? It's either there's a defined ratio between two things, or there is a mystery, right? The irrational numbers, that, I mean, we're all about the mystery. I mean, and maybe you can measure, you can, the golden mean, what the whatever it is, the joints on your fingers are applied in, but no. All this measurability, it's a ruse, I think. I mean, it's useful for dead things, but it is, as you talked about, and Rob, about that even the most educated and most learned and experienced practitioners, still there's uncertainty and there's subjectivity around the diagnostic frameworks, and it takes understanding, it takes time, it does not take efficiency. And rationality, to me, and again, Johanna, please, if there's an articulation of that definition that refutes me, I welcome it. But man alive, this, why measure my humanity? And that some things don't deserve to be understood. Some things just deserve to be witnessed and held in awe and given love. So
Well, this is amazing. It's so hard for me to do this. It's so hard for me to get here. It's so, like, if you understood what it took me to show up here and do this, and please then compare, like, that vague imagining that you have about how hardcore it is for me to get here, with the massive amount of nourishment, the massive amount of regenerative living energy resourcing that is in this conversation. When people are able to gather together and just be with this together and notice how we feel and notice how we have a collaborative dialogue about it, there are emergent subjects that come up, and then, like, we get to explore them, and it's really life-giving for the body. It really restores physical function. It's the only way that I'm functioning, because this is such a meaningful collective conversation. The more we have these kinds of conversations, the more we are giving that physical strength and vitality to people who are deprived of it because they're deprived of the conversations. And that's why we needed a public media platform. And that's why it's a life and death consideration for us to keep the broadcast infrastructure working, so that we can do this at any opportunity we have. So I'll read through some of these points, and we can riff a little before we close up for the day. These sections that I have here, we want Rob I'll just keep going through these points when we're able to meet, when we're able to broadcast together. Whenever that can be possible, we'll just sort of keep moving through it, if that works for you, and we can talk about the logistics of that more off camera. So these are the remaining points in my notes that we were planning for 2 sessions. There's no way that we're going to cover all of them in 2 sessions. We want to talk about the intersections of your work that are influenced by effects of the things that cause neuropsychiatric symptoms that usually are not taken into consideration, like toxic exposure, environmental contaminants, physiological sensitivities, neurological injury in many ways. There's a multi-factor concussion epidemic that we have been noticing more and more, where a massive number of people have unrecognized, undiagnosed, untreated concussion injuries that are then, all of these things are then said, oh, they have this inexplicable, this is a mental illness of some kind, and we don't really know why, but that's what's happening, instead of the real issues being addressed, which means that a predatory interest can put poisons into a community and sweep a whole lot of people into forced incarceration just by doing that. So that's something we talk a lot about in terms of psychiatrization and human trafficking pathways, because your work has brought so much clarity and specific data points to us about that. There are conversations that we want to have a lot more deeply with you in terms of like the solutions that we discover when we really listen to the people who are impacted, especially those who are severely impacted, that instead of locking them up, mischaracterizing them, and monetizing or commoditizing them, that there are actually really powerful steps we can all take together so that a lot of these problems wouldn't even exist if we were just leaning in and building relationships with one another in that way. And Rob, I wanted to talk with you more about this right away in December 2023, and a series of events meant that that was not possible at that time. But you were telling us some about the different kinds of community building that you were doing, and we've never gotten to talk more about that. And I'm so excited to talk more about that. I'd like to ask you more what you see needs most to happen. We want to know more about solutions that you're feeling moved toward, and solutions that you're working with now or want to be working with, what you're aiming toward, what are you aspiring to be able to do? What do you want to see happen? What do you want communities to gather support for? And we really want and need to see your work supported on the basis of everything we've seen and how highly leverageable that has been for the safety and well-being of all those we care about. Like, how do we flow resources in to support this work in whatever way allows it to continue and deepen and expand? So those are generally my remaining points, although I certainly have a lot more.
You got 12 minutes, 12 minutes to answer all of those.
I didn't hear a question there, so shall we just move on?
I don't want to put you on the spot. I have a bad habit of saying to a person in a public broadcast, "Oh, please, would you come back?" And then being like, I should have asked them privately and not in the public broadcast.
I noticed Joanna did submit a follow-up comment that I wanted, because I didn't quite actually understand the original comment there. So I'm interested in this. And yeah, one thing I'll say, I'm not sure I'm still fully understanding it, but around the concept of rationality, an interesting thing I saw many years ago was this, it was actually called like philosophical therapy. And this guy was practicing it, but it was pretty fun. And what it was is it was just kind of what we're talking about, like someone who, though, was heavily experienced in kind of philosophical ideas and theories, was a philosopher, and then would talk with you about your life and your troubles based on that, and using rational thinking as a tool for problem solving in oneself and in one's life. And this kind of, the true notion of rationality when it was originally kind of conceived, right? That this very sober, very grounded approach to saying, can we think this through together? Is this logical? Does this make sense? Does that make sense? Where does that lead us then if we go there? And I do think that there can be some benefit to having that in one's life, and to have, again, I think it's in a friendship relationship most pertinently, someone who helps you think things through and kind of you can bounce ideas from. So I don't know if that's in any way getting to what Joanna is approaching with this idea of the role of rationality in relationship, but that's kind of one of the positives I see there.
I'd like to read what she wrote also for people who listen and aren't able to see. I put it up on the broadcast screen.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I should have done that.
Oh, no worries. What Joha says is, I have mixed responses to the term and idea of rationality. The person who was talking about it, I think, was seeking something akin to using good logic, perhaps a kind of sobriety. And so sobriety in many forms is also something that we talk a lot about in the network. Like the idea of sobriety is not just something like it's marketed in terms of addiction to specific substances, but all across many different kinds of communities, we're noticing there is a need for more sobriety in our thinking, more clarity in our thinking, more groundedness in how we're approaching various issues. I appreciate that word being brought in.
Yeah, totally. And I think oftentimes when people are, a person might be escalating into a crisis, which I think could get them locked up, or even they're in the midst of the process, I'll notice that that's a feature that's leaving them, is the ability to kind of, something that they usually have in spades, right? An ability to kind of step back and question themselves, even just in a sober way, like, okay, is my particular interpretation of what's happening here correct and accurate? And I think just that question alone can have enormous sobering and positive effects on a person, even if they conclude, yeah, I think I am actually thinking about this correctly. Often just the process of questioning, it can bring them to the point of understanding, oh, but I can kind of see why maybe the other person isn't connecting with me right now and isn't seeing it now that I've kind of thought it through in my new way. Or even, okay, yeah, now I'm not even sure myself, and therefore why am I expecting them to be sure? Things like this, because often what's happening I see in these involuntary commitment situations is like people going at loggerheads. One side saying you're insane and we need to lock you up, and the other one going, no, I'm totally not, and you're completely wrong. And I think often if they just kind of could talk, they'd go, okay, yeah, everybody's a little bit crazy and a little bit not, and can we talk this through together and figure out a solution to whatever is happening.
I'd like to mention briefly also that in these situations, many times when a professional with power is instituting things a particular way, often they are being rewarded for doing that by having things that they are essentially addicted to an economic level of being able to access certain ways of lifestyle. That there are a lot of things that people end up with when they have power and privilege, that because they are not able to find a truer grounded sobriety in their thinking, because they are so attached to what they receive for doing things in a particular way, that we need that kind of sobriety coming in to conversations too. And it's important to see that going on, even with people who seem like, well, they don't have any troubles like that, they seem to be doing great. Often there is some issue like that going on, often invisibly.
Oh, absolutely. And that's one of the things that bothers me about all this so much too, is like whoever you turn the lens on, it's not hard to start finding fault in people's lives, or faults in their thinking, or, craziness, in their behaviors. It's a matter of who, and often, like you're saying, you've got somebody in a position of power who's paid to turn the lens on someone else and not on themselves, right? And then that pattern over time repeated, and that person can completely disconnect from any kind of sobriety. I think, this is what I see a lot. There's a remarkable lack of self-reflection happening in the psychiatric field in particular. I'm really struck by it at times where I'm just, looking at a psychiatrist going like, are you like questioning yourself at all here? Like, where do you get this arrogance of your capacity to assess someone else in this with just a few little cobbled together tools they learned at school? Like, it's just, to me, yeah, it's one of those things that drives me crazy.
And people are having so many different life experiences, people in every walk of life, people who have been through things that they've never been able to reveal to anyone else, people who are dealing with criminal activity or exploitative activity in their professional environments or in their community environments, where, anywhere you look, there's something that's stressing people out that they're having to figure out. And when we anchor that relational integrity, when we say, hey, I want to be with the body of the ecosystem, like what are we all really experiencing and how can we really know one another? That's when we find solutions. And without that, we get really cut off from solutions. So it's just another reason I'm really grateful for these conversations. So we have like 2 minutes or 3
Right.
minutes. or
So
something
right
like
now,
that.
your list of topics is really just a, a teaser, a preamble for the next conversation.
Right.
Unless there's anything in particular you wanted to touch on before we go, I guess.
I want to say out loud for those who are listening instead of watching, Rob, if you would say everything you can think of about how people can find you and your book and your website and your Substack. Let's talk about that for the final few minutes here.
Sure. Yeah, I'm the most active right now on Substack with a column called Psych Force Report. So feel free to come there and subscribe for free. And yeah, that's where I'm kind of trying to do more regular updates on these issues. My book is available anywhere you can order books or buy books usually. And yeah, my website's just my name, robwipond.com. But as I said, most is happening through Psych Force Report right now. And I tend to be most active in social media on Twitter/X, just because that's where most interaction seems to occur for me. I'm a little bit on Facebook and some other places, but yeah, so I'm out there and people can reach me directly through my website. That's a good contact form there, as well as my email address if they want to share and ask some questions directly personally. I'm often available for that.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, Megan
Wow.
Elizabeth, do you want to hop over to StreamYard with me and have a little bit of post chat and then come back to Zoom and do that?
I don't even think my brain can figure out how to do it. I think if we try to do it, I'm gonna push something and like something horrible is gonna go.
All right.
I'm holding it together.
Well, I will say goodbye to you in the room, and I'll be back in a moment. So.
Okay, but do we need to be? Oh, but there's this thing that happened. Do we have to be quiet?
No, you don't. I'll mute you.
No.
No.
You have that, but there's a button. We've been working this out. There's this whole tech thing going on.
I have the power. All right. You will see me back on Zoom in a moment.
Okay.
So have we gone non-live now?
Well, so here we go. I'm muted in Zoom right now, and I can hear Megan Elizabeth in the background, and you can't hear her on YouTube, but it's pretty fun. So thank you all for coming here to the Purple Squirrel Cafe and the Intuitive Public TV and all other channels. So we will see you when you become purple again.